You're tuned into the Writing Community Chat Show, the live streaming YouTube podcast that brings you the stories of authors, screenwriters, and more. Indie or established, this show's for the community, and we invite you to be a part of it. Head to the writingcommunitychatshow.com for more info. The WCCS. Together as one, we get it done.
Hello and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. Hello everybody and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. We are back for season 17, which is absolutely incredible to think about. Last year has kind of gone very quickly and all amazingly, and suddenly we're in 2026, so happy new year to you all. Last year we were voted number 3 out of the top 10 UK writing podcast, which is really nice to hear from one of the online blogs. So it's great to hear that kind of recognition, and it was a good year. And this year we have lots planned as well. We are hopefully going back to Harrogate, the Crime Writers Festival, for the 5th year in a row. And we are also attending for the first time the London Book Fair, which is very exciting. So we've got lots of plans. We've got lots of great guests lined up for you as well. But tonight we've got a great one to start the show with. But first of all, of course, my catch up with Mr. Hooley. Hi, Chris. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm really good. Happy New Year to everybody. Obviously, this is the first of many, many shows this year. So thank you for tuning in. If you're listening or watching, we do really appreciate the support. So thank you for doing that. And yeah, tell us what your goals for this year are. A lot of people like to do that at this time of year. Accountability is one of those things that can get people going. So yeah, let us know what your plans for 2026 are.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, Chris. Plans is something normally I'm quite up with in New Year's, but I have not made any at all for 2026. Have you?
Yeah, the one I've got for 2026 is just to read every day. Didn't necessarily read every day last year. Got on top of me a few times. So even if it's just 10 minutes, I want to keep that reading muscle going. And hopefully that'll impact the writing as well. So yeah, that's my sort of goal. And lose weight, because we've, at Christmas, we tend to pile on the pounds. So shifting a few of those would be good.
Yeah, of course. We've often got that goal going on though, Chris, because we've got stuff like Harrogate coming up. We do appear on this show a lot. It's 370 plus shows now. So we do try to keep a little trimmer if we can. But yeah, with live shows coming up, we are looking to drop weight anyway. So don't specifically think that's a New Year's goal. Anya says hers is to finish my work in progress. And of course, that's one of mine. And not to stress as much over stupid shit. And I think that's great advice because we all do that way too much.
Yeah, absolutely. But tonight's guest is an absolutely fantastic guest. And I'm so excited because we've talked about this on the show multiple times, having people on that can write funny fiction. Yeah. And we've had a couple of authors that would fit into that bracket. C.K. McDowell, he was on the show. He was hilarious. And obviously he does write really funny books as well. And we sort of picked his brains a little bit, but I'm really excited about tonight's guest because he literally did write the book on how to write funny, which is definitely something that I'm excited about to have a little conversation.
Yeah, I think it's very tricky, isn't it? And of course, what's important for a lot of the writing community, even those people that are writing not specifically funny novels and fiction, it's about writing humor. One of our longtime followers and guests we've had on the show, Ross Young, writes humor into dark fiction really well. And it's about learning how to do that for a lot of people as well. So we're going to pick his brains on a lot of things. So let me introduce tonight's guest, and then we'll get stuck into it. But of course, remember, if you've got questions for us, throw them in throughout. And at the end, we've got a section for questions, specifically if you want to save them to the end, but you can do them throughout, okay? So, and please do hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't done that, of course. So we are kicking 2026 off with a massive guest. If you ever laughed at Spitting Image, which I have I got news for you, which I have, or the BBC sitcom Not Going Out, which I definitely have because I love that show. You've definitely laughed at this man's work. He is a founding member of the legendary Comedy Store Players alongside Mike Myers and Paul Merton. He's a songwriter for the smash hit Horrible Histories, where the songs have helped the show secure a staggering 8 BAFTAs. But he's not just here to talk about the past. He is a mentor who has helped 57 writers pick up their professional BBC credit in just the last 4 years. He is a contributor to the 2026 Writers and Artists Yearbook, the author of The Essential Guides, Complete Comedy Writer, and Funny Up Your Fiction, which you can see above Chris's head, and the creator of a semi-autobiographical trilogy of novels exploring the history of alternative comedy in the UK. Whether you're writing a sitcom, a screenplay, or looking to add funny to your next novel, he's here to show us that comedy is a collaborative, community-driven process. Please welcome to the show the man behind Sitcom Geeks and the upcoming Shakespeare Mindset podcast, Dave Cohen. Hello, Dave.
Hi, Chris. Hi, Chris. And Chris, nice to meet you both in person here. And apologies. My clock was slow, and I dashed in here with about a minute to spare. So, but we can pretend it's all really smooth and clear now. But lovely to be here.
Yeah, no problem at all. It's normally Chris that's late and the guest is early, so it's just a bit of a flip round for 2026, but that's absolutely fine. Dave, how are you doing? Thank you for joining us, and how are you doing?
Very well, thanks. I'm very excited. Certainly about this new podcast which you mentioned. So that's kind of been taking up a lot of my hours really in the last few weeks. Yeah, looking forward to that. We can talk about that at some point.
Yeah,
I hope.
Of course. Yeah, and we know how that all works, obviously. And you've podcasted before, so yeah, that's interesting that you're starting up the Shakespeare side of things. So we'll dig into that definitely. But first of all, we like to look at kind of your road to writing and to where you are now, and that's been quite a journey, working along, on the BBC and alongside different shows and with comedians and stand up as well. Was it stand up or writing that came first for you?
I'm pretty sure it was writing from a very, very early age. I thought I want to be a writer. That's what I want to do. And I was just told, well, there's no such thing as being a writer. Not when you're living in Leeds in the 1960s. Writing is what them folks down south do. So I thought, okay, well, if I can't be a writer, I'll become a journalist instead, which is what I did. But then alternative comedy happened, and I just thought, and I've always written songs as well. So I went and played punk gigs, playing sort of silly songs at punk gigs. And then the alternative comedy scene kind of came directly out of that. And so I went into stand-up comedy kind of as a distraction, really, I suppose, but actually it was I ended up staying there for 10 years, being a stand-up comedian for 10 years before I had then sort of got down to actually writing. I was already in my 30s at that point, becoming a proper writer.
I think obviously with stand-up you do write your material, and a lot of the time it's off the cuff as well, but you get that instant feedback, and when you write a novel, that's not the case. Did you feel how different was the feeling from delivering, say, stand-up to waiting for feedback from a novel?
Yeah, I talk a little bit about this actually in the book, Funny Up Your Fiction. Yeah, you think of a joke and you've got a gig that night and you go and try the joke and it gets a laugh or it doesn't. You go away and you hone it and you play around with it and try to make it work again, and it works or it doesn't. And that whole process, takes about 2 or 3 days. And, I just had this joke that I wrote. I remember thinking, this was a joke that I was so pleased with for the book, for one of the novels. And I just thought, it's going to be 2 years before I find out if it's funny or not. So it's very difficult. And I think the key thing really, and I'm sure we'll come back to this, I'm sure everyone you've ever had on the show will say this, but is with writing fiction, you're writing character, really. You're writing stories that happen to characters. And really the the best jokes are always, and it's true in sitcom, in screenplays, in fiction, the best jokes are character jokes. So that's you just kind of have to really make sure your characters are the right kind of siphon, and you still don't know even at the point that you've finished the first draft or even the second draft. Does it work? I don't know. Haven't managed to put it in front of an audience yet, so I don't know.
Dave, can you take us back to the sort of first moments that you started to share your writing with other people and what that process was like?
Well, I suppose it was songs really when I was about 14 and 15 years old, and I started doing songs in like school shows and stuff. And it was just unlike, it was, my life began basically, really. I stood on stage and sang songs, and people laughed at them, laughed with them rather, not at them. I mean, laughing at me, that would come at a later stage towards the end of my stand-up career. But yeah, that was and that was a real moment that I got hooked on the idea of, wow, this is fantastic, people laughing at this. But also, maybe I thought that was funny when I wrote it and the audience laughed. Maybe there is something here, even though I'm 14, 15 years old in Leeds, and nobody can ever become a writer if they're from Leeds.
Yeah, it's definitely, the feeling is much more accessible, the industry now. And is that the case with the writers as well, and say sitcom, in the world of sitcom? Because talking about the era that you grew up in and the location you grew up in, now we have instant access to, say, self-publishing. Is that a similar reflection in the world of sitcom?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I talk about this in the thing I wrote for the Writers and Artists Yearbook this year, which is that if you've ever been to London and you hear this, you'll be familiar with the phrase "doors opening, doors closing" every time you get on a tube. And it's true that the doors have opened further now. I mean, it doesn't. When I for the first 30 years of my comedy writing career, I had advantage by dint of being white male, and that was kind of enough. Nobody really asked any more questions. But when a woman came to try and write comedy, or a person of color, there was they were so unusual that it sort of brought attention to it. With and there was this whole thing, oh well, women can't be funny, and that was, again, so these old prejudices have all broken down. I'd like to think that we alternative comedy pioneers were part of that, but I don't think it was really much of that. But yeah, there's loads, anyone can write, but the fact is that fewer and fewer places are making stuff. I mean, the BBC is still the prime maker of stuff, but they've kind of they've just been cut back so much over the last 30-40 years, and very, very hard to get a show made on BBC, very, very hard to get shows in America as well. It's a really, really tough time, but hey, anyone can do it.
Yeah, and at the same time, you've helped people transition into that career, so it must be relatedly or sort of remotely accessible at some sort of level.
Oh, I think so, yeah. It reminds me when I stopped being a stand-up in the mid-90s, and I thought, I do want to be a writer, and I thought, I'll write screenplays, because there's this really exciting world out there of people who are like the screenplay universe. And I got I really love, there's a lot of people still doing great work for sort of writers in the community. A guy called Elliot Grove, who runs a company called Rain Dance, and they kind of make low budget films. They've been making low budget films for 35 years, and they were that was exciting, and there were all these other sort of great possibilities for screenplay writing. But then this is like in the mid 1990s. There's still, at that time, there's like 50 films being made in the whole of the UK. 10 of them are being big American Bond movies or whatever, then another 10 are kind of successful spin-offs of some other thing, and then another 10 are, well, that person's getting to make a film because they had a success last time. So there's hardly anyone's getting them made, but everybody thinks, I want to be a screenwriter. So there is a kind of, I mean, there is just an element of, if I have to be brutal about it, fantasy, you know.
Yeah.
And I was a part of that, really. I you know, I wrote 5 screenplays. Nothing ever came of a single one of them. I've written 3 novels, and frankly, I'm not sure that anyone's ever going to read them, you know. But I liked doing it. It was good. It's good for me as a writer. It made me a better writer, I think. But yeah, there's the possibilities are there, but I mean, the actual openings are very, very few. The doors are closing.
I think Stephen King's novel on writing has been a real eye-opener to me about the sort of level of commitment you need to have, regardless of your beliefs, of whether or not it will work. And that was a person that just managed to keep going around his life and the sort of chaos that was going on. And the office finally came in, if that makes sense, you know, and it wasn't. Got a bit of echo. If you can hear that, I do apologize. Yeah, that was that's kind of an eye opener. And I've got a friend locally who started working in sort of directing in films. We live in quite a small place in South Wales, and he's just had an announcement that he's made a few films already that have done well. He's now making a film with Quentin Tarantino as his first acting role since, you know, going back in Pulp Fiction days, probably. And Simon Pegg and all these other people. And it's really great to see these sort of small creators in small places coming up and getting the opportunities. So I think they are there. You've got to be very lucky and you've got to be hardworking. And for those two things to come together, I think, to make that success happen.
Yeah. Whereabouts in South Wales, if you don't mind me asking?
Kind of near Bridgend. Between Cardiff and Swansea.
Right, yeah. I lived in a place called Brinner between Bridgend and Pontypridd. That's where I was. That's where I was a journalist, and in fact, there was a place called Chapter Arts Centre in Cardiff, and that's where that was. I did actually make a film there in about 1981 when I was a journalist on the Pontypridd Observer. It's fantastic. That was a fantastic South Wales cinema scene. There was a guy called Chris Munger who went on to become a very successful movie director, actually. But yeah, so I mean, sorry, I digressed there when you said about sort of the coming from South Wales and being able to, you know, it is interesting that the most successful stuff, I think, now tends to be, you know, very personalized stuff. I mean, even something like 4 Weddings and a Funeral, which was the sort of the film that was going to change everything and make Britain the home of movies, but it was a very, very personal film for Richard Curtis, and you know, but on obviously lots of shots of red buses and black taxis, and which are now staples in every single, you know, Netflix show where England red bus, black taxi. You know, all right, Gov, where to, Gov? Matt Lucas as the taxi driver.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is that there's it's a balance to be had between, like, kind of, you know, keeping it local, but making it global, and that's and dare I say comes back to character again. You know, a kind of a narcissistic chancer in Bridgend is the same as a narcissistic chancer in LA or New York. So
there was quite a really amusing scene in one of the new Walking Dead spin-offs where they went to London, and the only thing they show in the first 2 minutes of the episode was an abandoned, sort of overgrown red bus, double-decker, and the phone box. We're literally crammed into the first 2 minutes of the entire episode, and that was it. But just to reference the fact and acknowledge they were in London, and I thought that was very quite amusing.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dave, I'm really interested in terms of, like, all the different hats that you've had as a writer, like how they transpired and sort of like what you've learned from each one.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I might need a moment to think about that. So, I mean, I've given a little flavour of it, I guess, with the sort of the stand-up gag versus the waiting for it to appear in a book. I think it took me a while when I became a writer for sitcoms, that because I come from performing and because I was used to the instant response, that if you sit in a room full of writers and you come up with a line for a sitcom or for a panel show or something, you don't get laughter. You get, yeah, that's funny. It's quite hard if you're used to an audience laughing to think, well, that's what does that mean, you know? And I kind of learned to trust writers, that writers could, who just did comedy writing, they could, the best of them could tell what is funny, or what has got a chance of being funny in front of an audience, and what hasn't. And often the favorite lines of mine would get rejected, and I'd be that was probably a very good lesson to learn. Was it's A, it's not personal, and B, it's you aren't necessarily right. You know, your first funny thought isn't necessarily the funniest thing. And so I think that's what I learned from writers' rooms, is to not be self-judgmental, and not be precious, but also not be afraid to shout out stupid things. And I think that's something that's held me back. That held me back probably as a stand-up, was that I started to kind of edit myself while I was on stage, which is always a terrible thing to be doing. And you really need to be open to mucking up, and admitting you're mucking up, or trying new things and whatever. I think with novel writing, that's been an amazing thing, because I feel really that I've had to actually get to know myself a lot better, and it's not always a pretty thing to have to do to look at yourself and think, yeah, I did a bad thing there, or even I didn't even know I was doing a bad thing there, or I didn't, or I failed at this thing without even knowing why I was doing it, or whatever. And so I think that's been the steepest learning curve as a writer I think I've had, is in the last 5 years, just doing these novels and knowing myself.
I'm interested in the different writing processes you've had, because obviously writing stand-up, writing in the writing room, writing for novels, but also the amazingly named Guns N' Moses band, writing music as well. Which did you find the more enjoyable, and perhaps which was the most challenging?
Well, being in a heavy metal band, wearing a wig, being the world's first Jewish heavy metal band, in fact the world's only Jewish heavy metal band, and having an electric guitar, and a band having a brilliant drummer behind me, and like rhythm guitar. I mean, it was just my teenage fantasy really becomes real. So that has to be really a kind of I'd like to say that I'm more mature and grown up, and that's kind of that was a really it was just a little phase I was going through. But no, I really love that. I mean, I don't really think of that as writing so much. I mean, we had about 5 or 6 songs, and they were just really silly little things. Like we did a version of Stairway to Heaven, which we said was so old it was actually it was one of the original songs sung 5,000 years ago. So we sang it in its original Hebrew. So it's just silly ideas like that, and sort of instrumental dance songs. And we looked like ZZ Top with a okay. So that was just total fun. I think it's fair to say it's like like anything in life, I suppose, like a kind of, like a bar of chocolate is fantastic in the moment that you buy it and you eat the first 3 or 4 chunks. And then after you've finished it, you feel a little bit sick. Whereas, kind of writing a novel is a sort of really, it's not really that enjoyable to sit there, but there is actually it is quite enjoyable. There is a sort of, the process of it is great. I mean, the thing that I should mention here, and again, I've talked about this in the Funny Up Your Fiction book, but it's true for all writers. You have to be a different writer for everything, really. And people often say, "Oh, this comedy business, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon," which is, but it's a sprint and a marathon and the 10,000 meter hurdle and the shot put, and it's everything. You kind of, but when you write a first draft, I was interested in, you were saying at the beginning about, I'm going to finish, I'm actually going to finish this thing. I think that's the greatest thing that I've learned from the novel, is you have to finish the first draft. And that finishing a first draft, that's you using a very different method of writing. I think to write a first draft, you're almost not thinking. You're just getting it down on paper, down. And then the second draft, you are actually starting to think at this point now. And it's a different, although you're just kind of tidying it up, I find. But then the third draft is the one that I find really, that's, you're kind of, right, I got to get hold of this thing now. I'm like, Dirty Harry and, grabbing hold of this problematic thing. What am I going to do with it? Come here, punk. I'm got to sort you out now. And then you get the next draft where you start to add jokes, and that's great. Oh, that's funny. It's a funny thing. So yeah, so they're all different. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, like, obviously you've learned an awful lot as a writer yourself, but then it's very different knowing how to write comedy to then writing a book, giving other people advice on how to do it. So what was that process like, and how did you sort of come up with the idea of going, do you know what, I'm going to help other people learn how to write comedy as well?
Well, the first book, the Complete Comedy Writer, which for those of you who are watching this one, I mean, that was like years and years and years of me just kind of writing occasional blogs and thinking about, there's actually, I mean, it was me learning on the job, really. And in fact, that's totally the reason with the second book, the one in your little corner there, the Funny Up Your Fiction. When I wanted to write novels, I thought, there's a million books out there how to write a novel, and I read lots of them, but then I thought, I'd really like, has anyone written anything about how to write a funny novel? And nobody had. And I just thought, I don't know how to write a funny novel. I'm going to have to learn how. And so that book was me learning how to write a funny novel. And it led to the immediate revelation of, well, what is a funny novel? I mean, first of all, it was like, I want to write a comic novel. You can't say that now. You can't Google, I want to write a comic novel, because then you get taken to a million sites that tell you how to do a graphic novel and not a novel with pictures. So you say a funny novel, and there's just nothing there at all. There was like one Reader's Digest, 8 tips for writing a funny novel, 2015 or something, and I just thought, there's got to be more to it than this. And then the other main sort of thought then was, well, P.G. Wodehouse wrote funny novels, they're fantastic, but a guest you've had on this show, Mark Billingham, he writes kind of brutal, grim murders, but he puts funny in there. Mark was a fellow stand-up comedian, so he can't, and we've talked about this, he can't not put comedy in his books, even though they're really horrible and brutal. So yeah, it's kind of that you even if you're writing in genre, then you can bring comedy into it.
What would your advice be on that process then? Because ultimately, if people are listening and watching to this, who often are kind of newer writers, who want to add comedy elements and characters, which we obviously talked about being very important, into this story, what advice would you have for them to do that effectively?
Well, very quickly, I could say every story, anyone that writes any story, comedy, tragedy, history, drama, rom-com, whatever, it's got a character, a main character. They've got a goal, a thing they want more than anything. There's an obstacle that's stopping them from getting it, and then there's the universe that you create, and then the character goes on the journey and sees the obstacles and things and resolves them. So those four things: character, goal, obstacles, and world. Those are all the sort of places where. So, for instance, let's say you're writing a murder mystery or something. You'll often see in the murder mystery that the character, the main character, is this sort of slightly weird, slightly eccentric person who's one step removed from normality. Either it's sort of a Poirot character, or the characters in the Richard Osman books. They're kind of one step removed, and so they're outsiders, but they're not outsiders. You often get like religious people who are like sort of private detectives and things, because they're, you can get away with a lot if you're wearing a cassock or something, and you can turn up in weird places, so that's a good example, I think, of somewhere where you can bring humor as a character. And science fiction is all about worlds, and the master, obviously, Terry Pratchett. Terry Pratchett's books really are about, he sums it up beautifully. He says, basically, you create a world, and we want to know how the shit comes in and how shit goes out, basically. And once you ask those questions, whatever world you're creating in your science fiction universe, there's going to be some funny things there. And one of the things that I discovered from Horrible Histories, which was really interesting, was that in the 1850s, the River Thames was an open sewer. It was, like London was a city divided by an open sewer, and Discworld really is kind of based on London in the 1850s. So, it's funny. And then for obstacles, you think of like a romantic comedy. Every romantic comedy, every romantic novel begins with the two people who are going to end together on the opening page. So you've got to spend 80,000 words putting obstacles in the way. And so that's a way. How do you do that? You do that in a funny way. In drama, the obstacles are the baddies, but in comedy, the obstacle is looking at you in the mirror. It's you. You're the one causing problems, and that's one of the main differences between comedy and everything else.
So how do you decide then the tone for books like Funny Up Your Fiction? Because I could imagine the sort of like, if I was to write a book like this, I'm thinking people are going to come to this and they're going to be wanting a certain level of humor in it, but I also need to teach them how to be humorous as well, and I need it to be constructive in terms of, here's how you do it. So how did you decide what sort of tone you were going to go with, and what was the process like? Well,
again, it's once you begin by saying it's all about character, you kind of you're doing you're doing what all the other how to write a novel books are doing, but then you're just saying on top of that, okay, so what am I bringing to this to this character? And I kind of look at it in the same way that I'd look at if I'm creating a sitcom character or something. What are the things that you want to bring to a character to make them fail? Yeah, I guess is what you're looking for. but I think also you're just looking at. I mean, you can. There's various standalone chapters in the book, and for instance, there's a chapter about Harry Potter, which nobody says, "Oh, Harry Potter, they are funny books." That's not the first thing you say about Harry Potter, but it is sort of about the fifth or the sixth thing you'd say about Harry Potter. Oh, by the way, there is this incredible range of secondary characters in Harry Potter. So you've got this, you've got the boring kids who are solving crime, basically. That's Harry Potter, isn't it, really? But then all these then the sort of teachers, they've all got these sort of weird things going on, and then you've got these sort of incredible elves and weird bar staff in places and shop owners, and they've all got a funny thing, and that's so I suppose my approach was to say, there's not that you don't have to think of a funny book as like, oh, this is going to be completely different to all the other types of books that I've read. So I did try to differentiate between sort of general humor and then what are the sort of things you can do in any book at all, in any genre, just to bring funny to that.
This is a bit of a sort of open question, but do you think it's harder to be funny now than it was maybe 20 years ago?
Yes, very much so. Yes and no. I mean, that's one of the things a lot of people often say to me. Anyone who wants to write comedy says, I'd love to write comedy. I'm a bit worried that some people will find what I say offensive, or they might want to cancel me, or I've got a very dark sense of humor. Everybody always thinks they've got a really dark sense of humor, but they haven't. Your sense of humor isn't as dark as you think it is, it is actually very, very hard to get cancelled. I think if you really want to get cancelled, you can make the effort. But if you look at the people who are always complaining about it, oh, the cancel culture, they have their own sort of proponents, So every sort of 2 years, Ricky Gervais brings out a Netflix stand-up thing, and he's got maybe like a minute of material about trans people that's very anti them, and then Netflix take that minute out and they put it on social media, and then all the people who hate Ricky Gervais, who hate him being anti-trans, they all say, listen to what he's saying here, how dare he do that? And of course the algorithms have no prejudices either way. They just say, oh, lots of people are running that Ricky Gervais clip, it must be, I must put it out to more people. So even if he wanted to be cancelled for that, which I sort of think maybe there is a part of him that would like people to think he's much edgier than he is, he can't do that because there's all these other people sharing it. So yeah, it is tricky though, definitely.
Do you think part of that is because we've had a transition, I suppose, in comedy, and you start off with like the Laurel and Hardys, and very physical slapstick jokes, and then you sort of move into maybe the Dumb and Dumber era, where it's similar to that, but there are some elements of story and character and jokes between people, and then you've got like more sophisticated comedy. Like I'm trying to think of examples just from the BBC, but like what's the play called where it's all gone wrong play or something like that.
The play that goes wrong or something.
That to me is like a mixture of both. So, but it's also really high level in terms of, for that to be able to happen and go wrong, there needs to be a certain level of planning and detail in order for that to happen. So do you think there's sort of like a progression in people's mind in terms of like, we are a little bit harder to get us to laugh at? Maybe we see too much, or we've seen too much sort of slapstick, and now you need to tickle our brains on a sort of intellectual level as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was when Mrs. Brown's Boys came out, 10, 12 years ago, maybe more now, about 14 years ago. I mean, I was as vociferous as anyone in saying, what is this? This is terrible. It's silly. It's racist. It's homophobic. It's misogynist. What on earth's going on here? Well, 10 million people watched it. That's what's going on here. It's the most successful BBC sitcom in years, and I've written for a few very successful ones, but that one was just, and that was when I had to sort of rethink my prejudices, because I'd always thought the whole alternative comedy thing is like, oh, we don't do racism, we don't do sexism, and we weren't making a political statement. It was more the comedians that I grew up watching were talking about Pakistani shop owners and mother-in-law people in a certain way that just wasn't relevant to my world. I knew more people of color than Bernard Manning's generation, and we didn't have these sort of battle axe mother-in-laws, so it was more that we were doing what our audiences wanted, or our audiences were like us. But audiences' tastes do change, I think, and something goes too far that way, and then something else comes up and it sort of goes another way. I mean, you mentioned Laurel and Hardy, which I grew up, loving when I was a kid, when I was 5-6 years old, and still love. But if you were to say to me, oh look, here's there's these two people, one of them is like, he's big and fat and he falls over and everybody laughs, and the other one, anytime anything goes wrong, he just and that's really, isn't that really funny? Morecambe and Wise, Eric Morecambe just used to sat there and he physically slap Ernie Wise, slap him on the cheeks, and his physical violence was done on Morecambe and Wise. And it's interesting that I just one other thing to say about that. So Dennis Norden is brilliant, great sort of comedy guru, great writer of the 50s and 60s and 70s of British comedy. He describes jokes as a momentary removal of sympathy. And that's a brilliant definition, because it is in the moment when we see Stan and Ollie falling over, or when we see Ernie Wise getting slapped, or we see someone getting hit with a frying pan, Coyote, whatever, that we are laughing at them. But then we come back and we go, oh, isn't that sad about that character? So it's complex. It's a little bit more, it's sort of complicated a bit, and I think where we are now is that we feel that there are people who do like nastiness, And
I was going to say, one of my I grew up watching Tom and Jerry as one of my cartoons growing up, and one of my favorite sitcoms ever is Fawlty Towers. And there was a big backlash on that recently, down to the John Cleese character smacking Manuel quite often, and that kind of humor, which I think was hilarious. But as you mentioned, the cultures have changed, and now they find that offensive. So it's like, is it a fact that the culture's moved on, and despite, like you said, at the time it's being made for that audience and the culture at the time, and now that's different, and people are looking back at it with different view? That's kind of the reason why that's going in that direction?
It's complicated, I think, partly for whatever reasons, whether it's social media, the kind of people not trusting the sort of systems and democracy and things, and people are much more tribal now. And I think, you can't, it's hard to do. I think a show like The Simpsons is interesting, because you see like a character like Apu, for instance, the shop owner. You could look at that, there is absolutely no racist intent in that character at all. But you look at it now, I mean, like, the first song that I wrote for Horrible Histories was a song called The Four Georges, about the four King Georges, and this was in 2008. And my thought was, I've got to write a song about four Georges. I'll do a boy band song. It was just sort of obvious to me, and so I had, like, King George IV was known to sort of live a rich life, so I was the fat one, and George III I was the mad one, and I've got jokes about him, one being fat, and jokes about the other one being mad, and actually that was in 2008 I got away with that. Whereas now there's just no way I would want to write that, let alone get away with that.
At the same time, in the modern world right now, considering all the people that are fear of the cancel culture, you've got things like Family Guy that are out that I've seen episodes of that I'm gobsmacked that they're actually, expressing what they're expressing and are still on the air, even though a lot of it is humorous. They're touching on religion, they're touching on race and all these things, and I'm amazed it's, with, for example, pulling up Faulty Towers, but then this show is running every single week and has hundreds of episodes where they're very much on the edge, and they're not fearful of that. I think they're purposely pushing the boundaries, but they're still going strong.
I'm not sure what exactly what, but a little kind of anecdotal thing I would say is that I've worked on and off at the BBC for sort of 40 odd years, and people say, oh, the BBC, they cancelled this, or they don't allow you to say that, or they do that. And really it's the idea that the BBC is this sort of big homogenous thing, and actually the comedy departments, they're just like sort of three people in a broom cupboard. And you write a radio show, for instance, and you say something rude. And we did about 10 years ago. We did a radio show that was about before Brexit. We wrote about it was like called 15-minute musical on Radio 4, and it was sort of like it was a sort of Brit-pop musical, but about Farage. It's about 15 years ago, and it was just a sort of silly thing about, he says, we got to leave Europe, and Angela Merkel says, okay, off you go, and it's just a bit of fun, and we got massive complaints from it. But it was all the same complaint. It had been typed, the same words were used about 30 times, so it's like one person sending from different aliases. But when you're the producer, and you have to, because it's the BBC and it's taxpayers' money, and you have to explain, you have to reply to every single complaint, you just kind of eventually, at some point someone's going to say, oh, I've got a really funny idea for a UKIP thing, and they're just going to go, oh, they just can't take a joke, those people. I'm not, ask another producer. I'm not going to do that. You just think, well, they haven't got the hours in the day to deal with the complaints, and that's often what happens. That's probably the Faulty Towers thing for you.
And in the comments has said that South Park is ripping on Trump and his cabinet mercilessly. I think that's been quite apparent on social media recently. So like similar things happening, but they're doing it through very popular, successful shows. So that's down to the writers obviously having their humorous attacks.
That's the end of South Park then. It's like these days.
Dave, I was going to bring it all back to something that you mentioned obviously at the start of the show, and sort of the comedy writing in Shakespeare, because some of the comedic elements for me are obviously like, he's got the slapstick jokes in there, he's got the sort of the innuendos and stuff in his lines, but I was obviously going to sort of segue into your new podcast in terms of like, why Shakespeare for you? What are you hoping to do with the podcast? And just why Shakespeare?
Well, funnily enough, I mean, it was just a chance thing. Well, it's about 30 years ago. I was still performing a bit, and I was asked to do a little Shakespeare thing, and I started reading. And my recollection of Shakespeare is probably chimes with a lot of people, was that I hated Shakespeare because the way it was taught in school was just like, it's like a language you have to learn, and you're just given this massive body of text, and it's like, oh, this is wonderful, this is brilliant, and you go, what? Forsooth, whither thou? What's this about? And then they say, oh, let's watch this film, and you watch Laurence Olivier as Richard III, this content, and it's all hammy acting. And it was just by chance that I was doing a little thing from Julius Caesar. So I started to read Julius Caesar, not having looked at it for 20 years. And I just, God, this is amazing. This rattles along at a pace. And I read another play, and I just thought, oh, I really like this. And that was like 30 years ago. And then when cut to last year, roughly, last year and a bit, because it was when Trump was re-elected, and there was this moment where this sort of line came into my head from Henry V, which is the king is but a man, as I am. And in that moment, it was a sort of, oh, I feel slightly better now. Not much, but Shakespeare expresses how I'm feeling now in a kind of, makes me feel a bit better. And I kind of went back again, and I went to Henry V, and I mean, it's just, and again, this is the what's happening with Shakespeare. It's upended all of my sort of thoughts and prejudices. So you think of Henry V, most people, what they know of Henry V is this sort of big speech that Henry makes just before they go into battle and cry for George, cry for St. George in England, and unleash the dogs of war and all this, and stiffen our sinews against the enemy, and it's all real gung-ho stuff, and people cite that as like the great British people. But then the next scene after that is these sort of 4 or 5 soldiers who are just they're like Dad's army. They're just terrible soldiers, and they're all jumping around. They've got, this guy's so excited, he's got a sword. He takes his the sheath off and goes, "Come on, who wants some? Who wants to fight?" And he puts his back on, and they're just, and it's almost, it's like a sitcom. It's like you've had this Henry V rousing speech, cry God, Harry and St. George, and then it's cut to, all right, don't panic, Mr. Mannery, and that's, Shakespeare was writing sitcom, even in his sort of deepest tragedies, and you kind of look at a lot of the comedy in Shakespeare, and there is a lot of cruelty in there as well, but it's kind of, it's not judged. It's just, this is what people are like, and there's no, there isn't a culture of judging people in the way that we have. We can't know what the culture was like, but if you look at every character in Shakespeare, there's just, oh, they do these funny things, or they do these mad things, or and yes, there are troubling things. I mean, the first, when I saw that The Merchant of Venice was described as a comedy, well, I thought, oh God, not when I was growing up. When you call Cohen and you got a big nose, and The Merchant of Venice, oh, like Shylock and all that, so it took me a long while to get past the idea that Merchant of Venice is a comedy. But actually, one of the greatest anti-racist lines ever spoken comes from The Merchant of Venice, comes from Shylock. Hath not a Jew eyes, hath not a Jew ears, when you prick me do I not bleed? This is the most brilliant anti-racist statement. Yeah, we're all the same, blood's the same, eyes and ears, whatever, So it's just every day since about a year and a bit ago, I'm finding new things that I'm really excited about, and I want to talk about it in a way that people aren't talking about it at this point, which is to do a podcast, and I mean, in a funny way, I hope, and just say, you've got all these people like the Daily Stoic and the sort of Mel Robbins, hey, you can be this and be that. Well, I think Shakespeare is the best advisor for how to cope with how terrible life is at the moment, so
it's a great name. The Shakespeare mindset really incorporates everything you're talking about, and I think that name, was that something that came up quite quickly for you?
Yes, it was actually, and I mean, I'm still not 100% persuaded by it, but I think it's good. I've asked loads and loads of people to come up, and some people come up with some great titles for me, like Shakespeareans. I thought was a really good one, but actually, in terms of the podcaster sphere, if I can invent a horrible word, that feels like a kind of, the word mindset, but shunted onto Shakespeare feels like a kind of thing that might, we'll see where it goes. Yeah.
I've got a question I need to ask before we've got one from the audience as well. So when it comes to writing comedy, and you mentioned earlier the writers' rooms, things like that, it's very collaborative. So if someone, say an indie author, is writing a novel, they want to inject humor into it, maybe it's a thriller, maybe it's a comedy book, and they want to test out if their humor is good, they haven't got that natural audience like a stand-up does. What advice have you got for them to get that reaction, maybe I don't know, through friends or family, whatever? If there's someone, because there might be someone who stays in house a lot, they don't go out, so what would your advice be to them to get sort of reactions to their humor attempts?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's difficult with funny novels. You can join a writer's group, and the people aren't very good at necessarily. If you might offend someone in your writer's group, and they will say, "Well, I don't think that's funny," and that's always a wounding, piercing thing to the heart. But I mean, I think there are get in touch with me, because I do have a lot of people in the community who are writing novels, and I've got groups of people who are trying to write funny novels. So at least you will be with a group who understand that not everybody's sense of humor is the same. I mean, one of the books that I read for research for funny fiction was a book by a writer called Shalom Auslander, and it's about, in this book, this I'm just trying to I'm trying to remember. It's pretty sick. God, my mind has suddenly gone completely blank about it. But and Frank hasn't died, but she's escaped to New York, and she's living in an attic in New York, and she's sort of in her 70s. But she can't come out because she doesn't want to come out, because that will destroy the legacy of her. So this family are trying to persuade her to come out. I mean, that is just, a lot of people would just say that is so outrageous. That is so beyond the pale. I mean, a fantastic writer called Paul Beatty, who actually won the Booker Prize, a book in which he's a black guy, and he wrote this book about he brings back slavery into his community and segregated schools, and he becomes really popular in the community. And there's a lot of people have really found that book really problematic. I mean, it's a really funny book, and the satire is spot on as well. But yeah, it is difficult. So get in touch with me, and I'm putting people. I one of the things that I like to do is put people together who can't find comedy writing groups otherwise.
Nice.
Yeah, I love that.
Awesome. Okay, question from Anya. We'll answer this. We are running out of time because there's been so much to talk about, and there's still so much to talk about, but we'll try and get in what we can. Can too much humor in a thriller novel dilute the tension? It's a great question. Thank you.
It's a good question, and I guess. I mean, we know what is the exactly right amount of humor, and I think it's just about finding moments. I mean, I did actually write specifically about thrillers, and in terms, I was talking earlier about obstacles and characters and goals, and the goal is a very big word in thriller. You have to do that thing, otherwise, you have to stop that person or the world gets blown up or whatever. So it's it's very, very goal orientated. So if you think about, well, what are the sort of obstacles that you come across when you're trying to get a goal? And I think little moments work really well in thrillers. Like you're just about to get into a kind of, you've got to get through to this place, and then there's a sort of very bureaucratic person who's stopping you getting in the place. This is just a little moment of humor, but it's great for injecting a change of pace, because I think that's a thing that, for me, thrillers often they are so much better, I think, if they have a little moment, a little pace moment, if you've got two characters going for something and then half, whilst they're scaling the wall or whatever, or trying to do something, it's like one of them's not wanting to talk about the BO problem that the other one has. It's sort of bring it back to a kind of to step out of the genre for a moment. You kind of, I guess, you learn by practice how long is too long to stay out there. I think you just have to. It's trial and error. That's the sort of thing I would do in a thriller. Little moments, I think.
Nice. Awesome. We've flown through this interview, absolutely flown through it. So we haven't asked our staple questions, and we do apologize. It'll have to be maybe a second interview at some stage. Dave, you mentioned about people getting in touch with you if they need to get some advice when it comes to writing a comedy, but also where can they find your novels? Where can they find your new podcast, The Shakespeare Mindset? Where can they basically stalk you on social media and find all that good stuff?
Well, I'm afraid you can't find me on social media. I have given up on that. But if you go to davecohen.org.uk, you can find a website where there's a lot of courses there, but there's also, I mentioned when the podcast is live at the end of January, there'll be a link on there. And there's also links to the novels there. So davecohen.org.uk.
Yes, excellent. And everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. We know at the start of the year, people are very busy, and we know some of you will catch up on this. So thank you for doing that as well. If you have follow-up questions, please do consider leaving them in the comments or sending them on social media or email, and we'll follow up with those questions and answers for you as well. Dave, from me, that's all done. Chris, any questions from you?
No, I'm just enjoying the fact that your voice broke halfway through that.
Hey, we haven't chatted on the show for a couple of weeks, so first time in 6 years we've had, I think, probably the longest break. 2 weeks, 2 weeks. Yeah. So,
but no, it's been fun, and yeah, absolutely amazing interview, Dave. Thank you so much for joining us, and you've shared loads of wisdom with us tonight, which we're extremely grateful for. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Everybody, stay safe. Have a great New Year's. If those resolutions are there for you, please do stick to them as best you can. We'll support you if we can do. We know people like to give it a week or two in January and throw them out the window. Try not to do that, and get some advice from Dave if you can do. So thank you, Dave. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you all very soon. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Cheers.